I'm Teresa,
And I'm Callista.
and we have started a new true crime podcast called Terrifyingly Typical True Crime.
And because of that, we thought we'd talk a little bit about what draws people to true crime in general, and then what specifically draws us to true crime.
I think that I was looking because I was curious what draws people to true crime. I mean, I know like why we like it. Like it sounds a little strong. Why we find it interesting. That a lot of women are more women than men listen to true crime, and I think that's because that's not. I mean, men are obviously victims of crime too, but a lot of the cases we listen to and a lot of things that we are interested in or want to know more information about, unfortunately, a lot of that has to do with women.
Yeah. And I do think because of that, there is the idea that women listen to learn from true crime or gain tips. And I personally don't like that. I'm probably being too sensitive, which I know is out of character, but I think there's the idea that the victims could have done something quote unquote differently. Could they not have been in that situation? Could they have gotten themselves out of the situation? And unfortunately, scary shit just happens sometimes, and there's nothing you can do differently.
That's true. So do you think like when you think of that, when you think like you listen to some case that, something obviously if somebody's murdered, it's always awful, but that, oh gee, I wouldn't have put myself in that situation. So I'm learning that I would never do that. Is that what you think when you think people
Yeah.
are learning from true crime?
Or like, oh, if she had said this, or maybe cajoled him or something, like, really? You think that would have helped her? And I don't think podcasts we listen to do that, or that the
No.
majority of them do.
Yeah, that's some BS way of thinking. I mean, that harkens back to, was her short, her skirt too short? Was she asking for it? That's some, patriarchal BS. So I definitely don't think that. I hope that's the right word. I just find it really interesting. I want to know what happened, and I never think, uh, yeah, I don't want to listen to somebody the victim blames, and I want to make sure that we never do that. Just because and when people are in abusive relationships and it's when somebody is out of obviously not in that situation, I feel like it's easy for people to say, well, I wouldn't have stayed or I wouldn't have done this. I just think that we can't do that. I think that we can sympathize with people, and we may even think like silently to ourselves, maybe I would have got out sooner, or I would have done this. I don't think that that's healthy. I don't think that, obviously the victim is gone. That's not going to help them. But I don't think that that's a good way to look at things. I just find it, I don't know, I'll say interesting again. I want to know what happened.
Yeah, and I think that, like, with abusive relationships or in an extreme situation, the reality is you can say, I'm going to do these things. You can have a 10-point plan, but you never know what you're going to do until you're into that situation.
Right. And then I don't know the statistics, but obviously if somebody is in an abusive relationship, when they leave, even if the, abuser doesn't have an inclination that they're leaving because, I don't know, whatever, they think they're so great or they think that would never happen. That's the time that it's most dangerous. It's also like I heard this horrible statistic that the highest, what happens, the most likely, I'm saying it wrong, that women die while pregnant isn't from like pregnancy complications or, horrible things like that. It's homicide. And, the likelihood that that is somebody close to them is extremely high. It's not generally going to be a stranger on the street.
Yeah, I think that goes into like that interesting thing. Like, statistics, shocker of shocker, are interesting because,
Yeah.
like, we talked about this in our first episode. Men are more likely to be murdered by a stranger. Women are more likely to be murdered by someone they know, and it's knowing why is that, not how you can prevent that necessarily, but why is that the case? Why is this type of killer motivated by this? What's the psychological profile? It's, you want to know more.
Yeah, true. I mean, of course, there are instances where, uh, the victim does not know the perpetrator, and I always think of, I don't know why that popped, maybe because the weather is nice and, I like to walk outside, but it makes me think of the horrible people are just minding their own business. They're just getting some fresh air, getting some vitamin D. And, some stranger, I mean, it seems like, like a bad trope in a book, but somebody is waiting behind a bush or they're just waiting for whoever, some random victim. Um, so there's certainly cases like that. But
Yeah. And yeah, it's, I think you could make a comparison that it's like a mystery novel, but I don't think for me it's about solving the mystery. Like, I think I'm smarter than the detectives to solve a cold case. It's just about, finding out more.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I hate to say, I know that I know some podcasts say that, we're going to tell you a story. And I don't really even like that word, because I don't think you are telling us something that happened. And I guess you could use the word story, but to me, that's too much like a novel, or it's too much, I don't know, it's taking you away from paying attention to like this horrible thing happened, and certainly find information and, advocate or listen or, be compassionate. Um, but it's somebody's life.
Exactly. I do think the word story is definitely distancing language.
Yeah.
And I mean, part of the reason I know I'm interested in true crime is because, like with fiction, again, completely different. It's nonfiction. These are real people. Is that you can empathize with them and put yourself in their shoes, and not necessarily like I see myself as a victim or they're just a victim. But it is that human connection. You're hearing about real people, and oftentimes the last moments of their lives. And there is that empathy, I think, that comes out of it.
It's true. It is really true. Why did I know we tossed around the idea of doing a podcast for a while. Why did you lean towards doing themes?
I mean, I think the majority of, or pretty much all of the true crime podcasts we listen to are one-offs, and those are super interesting. And often the host will do a deep dive into the psychology of the killer, or the area, or the cultural environment of the time, which is super freaking interesting.
Right.
And I think we wanted to do themes so that we can connect those. So like, say we do a specific geographic location, we can really dive into that culture and time period, or we do a certain type of killer. What is their psychology? What's driving them? Or even with our last theme on why celebrity fandom turns to murder. Why are they targeting that victim? Not that the victim's doing anything wrong, but what is that commonality?
Yeah, that's true. And I know we're currently working on female killer nurses, and it's just, again, people that don't listen to true crime or don't watch Dateline or 2020 still on, whatever, crime shows.
48 Hours.
Yeah, 48 Hours, Unsolved Mysteries. Though I think that's on Netflix now. Anyway, they, a lot of people just don't want to be aware, and maybe that's, they live alone, or I don't know, they're scared that's going to keep them up at night, or they're going to have nightmares, and I can certainly understand that. But I think that maybe people think that things like, like the killer nurses, oh, that must be a one-off. There must just be, a couple. Certainly there's not very many, but like, I know you researched that. There are so many that we're breaking it into, two different parts. And that's just female nurses, because there's a whole other, there's a whole bunch of men that are killer nurses too. So yeah, I find, because I feel like when you listen to a one-off, and it's something kind of unique or different, like, oh, maybe I'd find it interesting to listen to another case.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think with that idea that this is a one-off, or this is so rare, there is the temptation, I think, to think the world is just full of bad people. Everything that could go wrong will go wrong. And I don't think that's true necessarily. People who listen to true crime, for people who are in the true crime space and who are working in it, that they necessarily think that everybody's out to get them. I think they're just curious and they want to be aware of those things.
Yeah, and I know some of the bigger true crime podcasts, they, good on them. They started, it seems like the heyday for that was like before COVID.
Yeah.
They, have turned to advocacy, or, they will do, I really appreciate listening to something that is maybe, though I find it interesting, I'm going to use that word again, to listen to like the same case from people's different perspective, because I feel like you always get like a little bit more information. But, they, because we certainly have like, what is it, white woman missing kind of syndrome.
Yeah.
So I appreciate podcasts that do, maybe under her cases, and, that people haven't heard. And I think it brings awareness.
Definitely. I think even, obviously, the advocacy is something super positive that's come out of the genre, but even just talking about victims who've gone, even necessarily survivors, not necessarily victims who have passed away, it's remembering them, and it's also kind of paying homage to them, honoring them, then their lives, because I know we're often focusing on the worst things that happen to somebody. But I know especially what we want to do is if we can find information on their life, we're going to do that, because they were more than that.
Yeah. I really appreciate don't want to name drop different podcasts we really enjoy. There are a lot. We listen to a lot of them that really kind of start with the victim and really give you, even in like some of the famous cases where the killer is famous and not the victim. And certainly that's going to be the case with some things just naturally, and especially I think when something happened like way in the past, but when they actually give you all they know about the victim and not like, especially like when people talk about sex workers, I think some people, that maybe don't listen to true crime think, oh, well, they're to blame, or look, if they weren't a sex worker, this wouldn't have happened, or you never know people's situation. So when people actually shed a light on that, or, this is how this person ended up doing this, I don't know. I think maybe it just makes you more aware, and it puts like, it's not just a name. It like really, that's a person, and look at this horrible crap that happened to them.
Yeah, and I do think with cases that focus on sex workers or even like historical cases, not necessarily super historical, like hundreds of years ago, but 70s that especially focus on gay men who were killed, there is that idea that they had a high risk lifestyle. And like, that's not a choice. And I think there's that cultural shift when you talk about something like that you realize that someone didn't choose a high risk lifestyle for the hell of it.
Right. And I do think, and again, Dateline and stuff, I don't watch those shows, but I feel like maybe when people, as contrary to what some people believe, the world is so, so much worse now. I mean, the heyday for serial killers and stuff was definitely the 70s and the 80s. And maybe because you only turned on the news, at 5 o'clock, maybe everybody, because crimes happened in Oregon, maybe people in Minnesota didn't hear about that unless, they murdered a whole bunch of people. I think maybe that people are not everybody, but maybe they hold the judgment for people that were gay, or people that were drug users, or people that were sex workers. There are still people there, about their life has just as much value as, I don't know, the 22-year-old, blonde college student that went missing.
Yeah, and I do think that exemplifies the idea that true crime or listening to stories about stories, quote unquote, stories about real people does bring you out of your own lived experience, your own little bubble. You can learn about cultures that you haven't personally experienced, or different lifestyles, and that there is no one right way, and that person didn't do the wrong thing to end up there. And I do think there is that increase of empathy and increase of just awareness, which I don't think is a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. And hopefully not all law enforcement, again, not all law enforcement is bad, but the cases that I've listened to where, yeah, unfortunately, like, a bunch of young gay, since you mentioned gay men, a bunch of young gay men went missing, or, unfortunately remains were found. It's like they just didn't give a crap. Like, oh, well, they lived on the fringe, or, oh, we don't care about those cases. What it's kind of like a doctor that does bad. Don't you take an oath? Don't you? I know you don't necessarily take an oath as a law enforcement officer, but yeah, there's something that you should be concerned about everybody.
Yeah, maybe there should be an equivalence to Hippocratic Oath for like law enforcement.
Yeah, definitely. Anyway, listen to our podcast. Tell us what you think.
Let us know if there are specific cases or themes you want us to cover. If you're interested in it, we're probably interested in it, and we want to dive into it.
True. Thanks.
Thank you.